Welcome to Telling the Tooth, the official mental dental podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Gross, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Laura J. Cox. We have a great episode with Dr. Clark today. She's a lot of fun to talk with, and she'll cover the history, process, and techniques behind designing dentures digitally. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's jump right into the interview. Dr. Wendy AuClair Clark completed her undergraduate training at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia, and then earned her doctoral degree from the Marquette University School of Dentistry in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She then earned her master's degree in clinical dentistry and certificate in postgraduate prosthodontics from the University of Alabama at Birmingham School of Dentistry. She practiced prosthodontics for 7 years with Team Atlanta. She was named a leader in continuing education by Dentistry Today and presents on a wide range of prosthodontic topics. And currently, she is full-time faculty at the University of North Carolina, where she serves as the director of pre-doctoral removable prosthodontics. She has published articles in numerous peer-reviewed journals, and her research interests and activities are focused mostly on removable prosthodontics, digital dentistry, and its applications in education and clinical dentistry. Dr. Clark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. I'm really proud to be a part of something homegrown at UNC. So thank you for asking me.
Yeah, of course. Well, first, we'd love to talk to you about digital dentures. We know you're doing a lot of exciting things there at UNC in terms and with regards to digital denture design. So could you just talk a little bit about digital dentures and what they are?
Sure. So digital dentures are basically any way that you introduce CAD/CAM into the denture workflow. So it could just be the design portion for the CAD, computer-aided design, or it could be the manufacturing portion, computer-aided manufacturing, which is printing or milling, or it could be both. So it basically takes a very similar workflow. If you think about it from doing a CEREC crown, you can actually do a very similar workflow with dentures. So digital dentures started in 2012, was the first time we ever saw any of the proprietary companies use digital dentures. And the first two companies, Avident and Dentka, one of them was more towards milling and one of them was more towards printing. And so that's kind of how all the workflows have evolved. I'm a little bit of a geek. Most people who have ever met me are aware of this. And I was actually first interested in the Dentka workflow because they incorporated a central bearing pin or a Gothic arch tracer onto their trays. And it's something that you don't see a lot of people do since like the 1800s. And I thought it was just really in awe that somebody was doing that. And I love to see all the workflows, how they're incorporating a lot of the conventional foundational stuff into the digital world. So that's kind of answering a couple questions of how, what digital dentures are and how I first got really geeky excited about them. And digital dentures are actually how I learned that I'm kind of an early adopter when it comes to technology, because I thought I'd be kind of an old school geeky person using my like zinc oxide and Dycal and green stick compound for border molding. And then this introduced me into a whole new world of possibilities. So I actually did my first digital denture in 2013. And like I said, they were first released in 2012. So I kind of got on the train a little early and have been really fortunate to see the growth and development that's occurred.
What type of impression do you take for a digital denture?
That is a really great question. And one of the things I love is that you can really customize the workflow for what works best for you and your patient. So most workflows now start with a conventional impression. It could be an alginate, it could be a border molded impression in a custom tray, or it could be a scan. There are a few workflows that have been introduced by companies that have finally put their name behind it, starting in February of 2020. But that's really the first time we've seen a company-sponsored workflow that starts with a scan for a final impression. So certainly most do start with a conventional impression, and then that gets scanned, and that's kind of how you enter the digital world.
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you. What is the startup cost to get into doing digital dentures, and how do you introduce that into a practice?
Again, one of the cool things is it's such a customizable workflow that you could truly have a startup cost of zero. Because most workflows start with a conventional impression, you send that to the same lab that you work with for your regular impressions, and they usually have a benchtop scanner. Most of the large labs and even small labs now have benchtop scanners, so they can jump into the fixed cost workflows, and they're very similar for removable. So if you take an impression, send it to your lab, and then start the digital workflow there, you essentially have a startup cost of zero. If you want to start doing a little bit more, there's a higher learning curve, especially with the design software. But certainly now there are $0 design softwares like Blue Sky Bio and Blender and Mesh Mixer, and there's a lot of and Dentka, and there's a lot of ways that you can get started without purchasing an expensive software. And actually, for some of the earlier steps, you can use a really low-cost 3D printer. So, for example, I like to play with the Elegoo Mars, which is a $250 printer that you get on Amazon. So you could go in with a $0 startup cost. You could go in kind of minimal with a low-cost printer and have your lab scan and a free software. Or you could go kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is going to be the 3Shape software, which was kind of the gold standard of digital design software. And you can buy a really nice milling unit, like the program mill or something from AuClair that costs several hundreds of thousands of dollars. So truly you can run the gamut from zero to hundreds of thousands.
Wow. No, that's interesting. And what is the learning curve for doing this? If you were a dentist who is interested in moving towards digital dentures, how do you get into it?
I know I sound like a salesperson for digital dentures, but I really get no kickback from the people with no teeth. But really, again, you can come in with a very minimal experience and very minimal knowledge and very minimal time or cost investment, and partner with a laboratory that does a lot. Avident, for example, has a lot of free education and free resources. You send them your impressions, and they really do all the work for you. So if you want to just kind of dip your toe in, you can work with a lab that does the design, the mill, the scanning, and everything for you. Or if you really want to go all in and choose a scanner or a software that you like, there's phenomenal resources for that as well. So, for example, Exicad has the Exicad Academy, and you can go and learn all sorts of stuff. Carbon Printer is phenomenal for their the workflows they have for designing and printing. So I would say it would be tailored towards whichever software and whichever manufacturing route, whether it's printing or milling you choose. They usually have really great resources for all of that. If you want to learn a little bit about digital dentures and kind of how to incorporate it, I give lots of CE courses. And certainly you can find one online, or you can listen to me on these amazing podcasts, and we could talk a little bit about the digital workflow. So certainly there's a lot of other people. Valerie McMillan, she is known as the Denture Queen on Instagram, and I always encourage people to follow her. She is so cool and has some of the coolest and most helpful posts I've seen on the digital workflow and how to incorporate it. So there's a lot of resources out there now. I used to say it's making dentures cool, but dentures have really always been cool, and people are just realizing it.
I love that. And as an interjection, we can definitely include, Amazon links to that 3D printer you mentioned, and we can include links to your CE and all of that in the description so that people who are listening can check those out a little more readily. So I'll make sure I get those from you after the show.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for that.
Of course. I was wondering, are those similar avenues in terms of learning how to use a mesh mixer software, for instance, or Blender? Because some of that is similar and overlaps with things that Dr. Jaycox and I have seen in the orthodontic world when we're designing in-house aligners. And I don't know, outside of something like YouTube, where people could go to get a basic understanding of how to use software like that. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, it's hard with Mesh Mixer. Blender is a little bit more open. They have the Blender for dental software, and so there's a lot of people that are more on kind of the Blender side than the Mesh Mixer side. But truly, everything I've learned on Mesh Mixer, I've picked up from a YouTube video or phoning a friend at one of my dental labs that walks me through it. There's a lot of cookie cutter type softwares. Dentka, for example, has Dentka Design, and it auto-populates and kind of allows you to set the teeth. I like that a lot because they actually made an educational version called Dentka Academy. So the people that took my class after you, Dr. Gross, actually all did a digital dental setup with the Dentka Academy software. So when they leave their second year of dental school, theoretically, they can open up Dentka Design and design a denture, no problem.
Wow. I'm so upset I missed that, Dr. Clark.
You could have
Sounds
been
great.
a TA for my class. So theoretically, you had a second opportunity.
There you go. I will highly consider it.
And Exocad also, recently, their denture module is a little bit newer than some of their other modules. So I don't know that the fine tuning is there yet, but certainly probably with the next edition, it'll be as straightforward as a lot of the others. And I know Exocad and Align kind of have that partnership. So if that's something that you'd be interested in using for Invisalign, then it would make sense to kind of use that same software and add the denture module to it. So I think if you're already using some sort of design software and it has a denture add-on, that would be kind of my recommendation to start. So if you're using 3Shape already, the 3Shape denture module, it's the same buttons kind of going across the top. If you're using Exocad already, then the denture module uses the same interface and it's pretty easy to pick up. And the same with Blue Sky Bio. If you're using that for your implant planning, then certainly adding the denture module is going to be a piece of cake. So it would kind of depend on what you're already designing and what you're using for ortho. Then using it for dentures is going to be pretty similar.
Great, thanks.
You had mentioned Invisalign, and in the context of orthodontics, it's really changed the way that we practice and the way that we distribute time as practitioners, and that there's the chairside time, but there's a lot of at the computer time in addition to our clinic hours. And so, there are a lot of pluses and minuses associated with that in terms of kind of doctor time. How has the transition to digital dentures changed time management or time distribution for prosthodontists?
That is an excellent question. And I had never thought about it in the context of Invisalign, because truly that's the ClinCheck step and all that is not something that you can delegate. For dentures, the majority of dentists are outsourcing their tooth arrangement already. So it's kind of an outsourced step where you take your wax rims, you send it to the lab and say, put the teeth on the rim. The CAD step is very similar. So when you get a lot of labs and companies, they'll send you back a digital preview where you kind of rotate it and look around, but it's not really the same kind of time commitment that you take, I think, with Invisalign. It would be similar to when you get your wax setup back from the lab and you evaluate it and check the occlusion and check the excursive. So really for dentures, it's pretty much a one-for-one. You're trading this step for analog to digital versus ortho, where you're kind of trading a clinical chair time step for a CAD CAM computer step.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. How do the costs compare to the patient or to the practice?
That also varies quite widely. Similar to conventional dentures, they'll say a lot of times you'll send an economy denture to a lab and the lab bills $100 to $200. But if you send a conventional denture to a really high-end lab tech, I've paid upwards of like $500, $600, $700, $800 for a single arch of dentures conventionally. So digitally, you're going to get the same sort of thing. You can get an economy printed denture from some labs, and it's going to be a lot lower cost. Or you can have something that's milled and then customized, kind of hand stained and hand detailed by a technician. That's going to be a lot more expensive. But I would say typically it's pretty one for one. One of the local labs we work with, the conventional cost, if you add up all the steps of custom tray, wax rim, buying the denture teeth, you end up with a cost of about $400 to $500. And kind of the high-end milled dentures is going to run you exactly the same. There's no difference in the CDT code for a digitally fabricated denture than there is for a conventionally fabricated denture. So it's going to be the same as if you do an EMAX crown that's pressed or an EMAX crown that you mill in-house. There's not a separate code for an in-house mill versus an outsourced mill. So the cost to the patients are typically similar, and the cost to the dentist are pretty comparable if that's what you're after. You can get a high cost or a low cost. I think the thing that excites me the most, and I'm going to give everybody a fair warning that I'm stepping up onto my soapbox right now, The thing that excites me the most is the possibility for lowering the cost and the possibility for the different workflows when you're thinking about access to care and patients that don't have access to dentures. So when you start thinking about Medicaid patients or patients that don't have insurance or patients that live somewhere rural that don't have access to a dentist that makes conventional dentures. And so I'm thinking first, this is making people excited to do dentures. And so one of the most common procedures that dentists drop when they graduate dental school historically has been dentures. There's a lot of general dentists that just don't do them because they're too hard or too complicated. And so my vision is for these students to graduate and to leave and not be afraid or intimidated or bored or whatever is causing them to not do dentures, because now there's something that they can kind of embrace in the digital world. So I think the first step is we're now going to see more providers, I hope, providing this service for the patients, which increases the access to care that way. The typical workflow for a conventional denture is anywhere from 4 to 6 visits, average of 5. And for digital dentures, it's 2 to 3. Average, I think, is like 2.56, according to the literature. So you're cutting the number of visits in half. And so somebody that has issues getting to the dentist for 5 or 6 visits may be able to get there in 2 to 3. And the length of those appointments are much shorter on average. So rather than spending an hour on MMR and doing a face bow, contouring their wax rim, and I see Ryan kind of going through PTSD from his dental school days, you don't use a face bow with digital. It's all brought in based on anatomic landmarks and the algorithms of the software. You don't have to necessarily do the same amount of work contouring a wax ring because you can use different landmarks to kind of auto-populate where the teeth should be. So you have fewer visits and you have shorter visits. So it makes it easier for people to get to the dentist. And then the last way is now that you can streamline a lot of the workflow and do a lot more in-house, you can buy a printer, and you can carry that and just plug it in somewhere. You can go to the most remote location where there is not a dental lab that makes dentures, or there's not a dentist that has the equipment to make dentures, and you can buy a $250 printer and a couple bottles of resin and now make dentures in a place that literally had no access before. So if you think about all of that and the number of edentulous patients that lack that access, this could really revolutionize and kind of disrupt that system. So that's kind of my vision and my journey with seeing this happen.
Wow, that's awesome. I can definitely see that vision, and that's something I wouldn't have considered prior to our conversation here, that it could drastically increase access to care for a population that's just naturally at risk and lacks access historically. So that's really cool. In the same vein, are there any other pros or cons when you compare digital dentures to conventional dentures?
Yes, and another thing that when you think of, and I'll tell a short story about one of my friends who's a prosthodontist, and she was seeing a patient that had dementia and was in a home. And she had a set of dentures that were old, she couldn't chew them. So my friend conventionally went through these 6, 7, 8 steps, which took a very long time and a lot of effort to make her a new set of dentures. And when she came back for her first post-op visit for adjustment, she said, "I can't eat with these. They don't fit right. They don't line up." And when she looked, she was wearing her new upper denture with her old mandibular denture. And she said, "Oh, this is an easy fix. You're wearing the wrong mandibular denture." And the patient said, "That's impossible. I threw my old set in the garbage can so I wouldn't get them confused." So now this poor patient that had so much trouble getting there to begin with has to start from scratch on a mandibular denture. So alginate, custom tray, wax rim, tooth try-in. Whereas with digital, the records are preserved. So as soon as you scan and design that STL file is stored at the lab or on your server, depending on who does the design. So when your patient throws their denture away, it's a quick touch of a button to replace it. I also like to tell a story about one of my sweet patients when I first started working here, and I made her a maxillary denture and her dog ate it. And so I said, "No worries, I'm going to call my lab and have them reprint it." So she came in, and it was, again, a challenge for her to get there with our parking lot, our notorious parking deck. It was when the bridge was out. So she didn't have to come in for any steps. She came in, I did a quick adjustment, and she left with her printed denture. a week later, she calls me, my dog ate my denture again. I'm like, all right, we're going to have to talk about your dog. I'm concerned about it. But long story short, her dog ate three mandibular dentures, and I only had to see her one time to deliver her the dentures, and then I made her like 2 or 3 extras because all I have to do is hit print. So if her dog got hungry, the dog could have a chew toy. She could have a denture.
It's a very expensive chew toy.
Yes.
Yeah.
How do they aesthetically compare, and in terms of patient comfort, like how do they manage to make it look as nice and lustrous as denture teeth?
So there are a lot of different workflows for the final product. And I have little tables that I can share if it'd be interesting, but you can really mix and match materials. So you could do a milled denture base and bond in denture teeth, like conventional denture teeth. So you keep that same luster and aesthetic. Same with printing. You can print a denture base and then have bonded in carded denture teeth. It's a little bit more expensive, but it gives you that look, that aesthetic that we're used to when we're expecting dentures to look like. Alternatively, you could mill the denture teeth, print the denture base, print the denture teeth, mill the denture base. You can really mix and match however you want. So if aesthetics are the biggest priority, you would use carded denture teeth, and that would give you kind of that look that you've seen. Printed materials, printed resins have grown phenomenally since they were first released. And I say that like it was a long time ago, but the FDA first cleared resin for intraoral use in dentures in 2017. So it's really only been around a handful of years. And during these last 3.5 years, the end of 2017. So we've seen just this massive development of this material getting better and better and prettier. And a lot of early adopters are printing dentures and kind of coming up with workarounds to glaze the denture teeth or do a cutback and stain. So kind of depending on your expectations and what your priorities are, whether it's cost or speed or aesthetics, there's certainly a workflow that can accommodate what you want.
Great. Have you noticed any difference in patient comfort? Can they tell the difference?
Not particularly. I've had a few patients with some of the milled or printed dentures say they feel lighter. And if you think about it, when you're milling something or printing something, you can machine it to precisely a certain thickness. And so you can have a denture base that's exactly 2 millimeters all the way around. Whereas with processing, you're layering wax. And if there's a steep palate, sometimes you're going to get resin that's 5, 6, 7, or even 8 millimeters thick. And that can get very heavy. So I think for certain patients with certain arch styles, they do notice a difference, particularly with the lightness, kind of the lighter heaviness of it. As far as fit, there's been a few studies that find that milled will either have a superior fit to processing or similar. Printing is so variable because it's so new. There's not a great amount of research on it. But to me, with milled, you're getting that consistency. So I always say with dentures, I think the reason people don't like them is because they're so unpredictable. And you probably both had similar experiences in dental school where you can do every single step perfectly correctly. And then there's processing error and something shifts or it gets really thick or the bite moves or a tooth moves. So even if the technician does everything perfectly, that can happen because there's processing error inherent in the acrylic itself. And just with a technique of press packing, things tend to shift around. So the technician and clinician can be perfect and you can get a terrible denture and vice versa. You could do everything totally wrong and then some magic happens in the processing and it happens to fit. With CAD/CAM, it keeps you a little more honest because it's a perfect one-to-one fit. If you make a good impression and it's very accurate and you send the scan and it comes across cleanly and you mill it, it's a true one-to-one fit with your impression. Likewise, if you take a poor impression, then it's going to be a true one-to-one fit and your base is not going to fit quite as well. So I feel like with fit, it varies, but it's certainly more predictable.
That's great. I was also looking at your history, which is a bit of a diversion, but it mentioned that you had practiced for a number of years before coming to UNC. Could you talk to us a bit about your career journey?
Absolutely. It's a slight divergence. I finished my PROS program in 2010 at University of Alabama, Birmingham. And I actually grew up, it was from the Metro Atlanta area. So I was looking kind of to stay in that area, Alabama, Georgia. And there happened to be, I happened to have a friend who had just met Marie Salama at a dental meeting. And so he connected me with their practice. I reached out. They happened to be looking for a prosthodontist, and it was kind of serendipity that I ended up practicing with Goldstein, Garber, and Salama in Atlanta. And it was really three of the kindest, most humble legends I could ever hope to work with. And they were phenomenal mentors for me. And I think one of the reasons I have gotten so into digital is because of Ron Goldstein. He was kind of at the point where most people would be at the end of their careers, but he had been practicing for over 45 years, and he treated every day, he still treats every day like it's a new adventure. And so he was one of the first dentists I ever met after 40 something years in practice to pick up a scanner and to pick up a laser. And he went all in on some of the new laser equipment for caries removal. And he was always trying new things and pushing the envelope and trying to improve the field. And to see somebody still doing that with such passion so far into their career was really inspirational to me. So I think that was, again, probably the reason I became an early adopter. In my practice, it was a heavy implant practice. So I didn't do as much removable as I was passionate about, but I always found ways to kind of sneak an immediate denture in. And that was, again, where I kind of started getting into digital because we were already doing a virtual setup for the implant planning for the full arch implants. Why not just convert that to a digital denture? And it kind of keeps the steps for planning from pre-treatment to immediate denture to full arch fixed implant prosthesis incredibly consistent, because you kind of have the end game in mind, even if that end game is years away. And I practiced there for 7 years. It was a multidisciplinary practice, periodontist, prosthodontist, orthodontist, a little bit of everything, some phenomenal hygienists. And I got to see a lot of really incredible dentistry that I'm very grateful that I have gotten to see. But I had always, in my heart, wanted to be an educator, and kind of my dream was always academics. And I'm grateful that I could take that experience with me and tell some students what it's like out in the real world of practice, and hopefully carry some of my experience onto them.
That's great. Thank you. We need excited, qualified people teaching our youngsters.
I'm nothing if not excited.
Well, Dr. Clark, you're definitely one of the most positive and encouraging professors I've ever met. So in that vein, do you have any last positive or motivational thoughts for dental students or dentists?
Yeah, I would say I am seeing this is the first time I've gotten to kind of work with the first, second, and third and fourth year dental students all at once. And kind of seeing the trajectory that these amazing, inspirational students are making during a worldwide pandemic, where they've had to kind of pivot from in-person learning to virtual learning to kind of hybrid learning. And they have been so resilient and so patient while us old fogies try to learn how to unmute ourselves on Zoom lectures and try to put PowerPoint together and use virtual learning platforms. That I think more than anything, I'm inspired every day. And I tell people that seeing this new generation of dentists that's coming out of dental schools from the last few years just really inspires me and gives me hope for the world and dentistry, because it's just such an amazing group of people. Their resilience is incredible. I hope they all know. I hope all the dental students listening across the world know that what you're doing is amazing, and it's motivational to us fossils that to see you overcoming a lot of the obstacles you've become, and it's going to make you all incredible dentists and incredibly successful in your careers. And I just look forward to being with my bifocals in my office in Brower Hall, watching everybody do incredible things.
Thank you so much. It's such a breath of happy, fresh air.
Just what we need.
And I think Ryan is an example of that, and all the things that you are doing and this time you took during the pandemic to cultivate mental dental and this podcast and all this, what you're contributing to dentistry right now is huge. And so I think you're a great role model for, even though that's why I'm telling you to go into academics. I think you're a great role model for young dental students that are hoping to contribute in the same way you are. So thank you, Dr. Gross, for contributing to the field in the way that you are.
Well, thanks for saying that. That's really nice.
And you do research.
I know, right? This is phenomenal. You are what a Carolina dentist should be. So I really am proud of you and all that you've accomplished.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
He is a keeper. We have openings, Ryan. We have openings.
All right. We will talk after the show. I love it. Do we have any final things we'd like to discuss here?
No, I think my only feedback would be I regret not playing more video games.
Oh my gosh, you and me both.
So that I could be better at CAD/CAM, and so that I encourage anybody thinking about dental school to pick up, computer games and learning to use a mouse and kind of work in that 3D environment. I think would be incredibly helpful.
Isn't she the coolest professor telling you to play video games? I love it. I incorporate video game knowledge into some of my videos, so that's right up my alley. I love that.
You're a visionary. I'm so excited about this. Thank you so much for having me, for including me in this. I'm happy to be a guest writing on your coattails, Dr. Gross.
Of course. We're so happy to have you here. Thanks again for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was really inspiring. Talk about a positive, fresh take on dentures. I mean, I honestly didn't have the most positive memories of that process in dental school, and I'm half tempted to go and give one a try. I don't know how it will fit all of my patients' intact dentitions, but we'll check it out.
Well, like you said before the show, that setting up denture teeth is like the edentulous equivalent of setting up an aligner case. So even though a different patient population, similar idea, right, with occlusion considerations and things like that. So
yeah. And she'd be such a fun person to have as a dental school professor too. The individual we had was a little bit morose and not the most pleased with his life, and so having someone who's that excited about dentures would really make a very different impression.
As we alluded to during the episode, I missed Dr. Clark by 1 year, so very upset about that, but happy that we could at least converse with her on the podcast. But yes, I was that close to having her as a faculty. And again, I feel like she would have encouraged us to play video games as homework. I mean, how much better is that?
You can't beat that. Yeah.
Can't beat that. I actually didn't know about the link between ExoCAD and Align. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I haven't heard of some of those software programs she was mentioning, like Blue Sky. I know in the orthodontic world, we use ULab and Mesh Mixer, maybe a few others, but those I was not familiar with. So I wonder if we could use those for in-house aligners as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, my husband's an engineer, so 3Shape, a couple of those I had heard of, but only in the context of more of engineering applications. So yeah, it would be, if they have denture applications, you'd think they'd be getting into clear aligners.
Yeah, I definitely think if I were a general dentist, I would be so much more apt to do dentures in this new world. I think the biggest positive from what Dr. Clark talked about was the decreased visit amount and the decreased appointment time, because I know when people come in with a bunch of missing teeth and they need the rest of their teeth extracted, one of their first questions is, how soon can I have dentures? And when you tell them we need to wait a few months for the bone to heal, and then it's going to be 6 additional appointments to have everything done, I feel like it's so disheartening to hear that as the patient. But to decrease that significantly, the amount of times they have to come in, I think is a massive boon in the denture world. So that I didn't really process that before she came and talked to us. So I think that's really a great benefit.
That is a huge benefit, and the ability to replicate dentures if they're lost, especially in older adults who have dementia, who, it is easy for them to lose a denture, throw it out accidentally. If they're living in a nursing home or assisted living facility where things easily get lost, it would be a huge benefit to be able to reorder dentures rather than needing to go through a total refabrication process.
That's a really great point. In response to your losing dentures comment, we have enough people in the orthodontic space who lose their retainers, and we know the benefit of being able to have a 3D printed model that we can just smack down some plastic and make a new retainer for them quickly, and not having to do another alginate or something like that. Because most of the time when you make, especially an Essex retainer over a cast model, I feel like the stone cracks at least at one tooth somewhere, so you have to do it again. But if you have the 3D printed model, they're going to make it. So yeah, I think it's not just a fad. I mean, digital dentistry is obviously a massive improvement in many, many ways, not in every field of dentistry, but a little bit more recently, we saw how the prosthodontics field has improved drastically with this new technology. So that's really cool. And we don't know where it's going to go from here, right? Because people in the 1900s, I'm sure, had no idea that this was going to be a future. So in 10, 20 years, who knows what'll happen? That's why dentistry is so exciting.
Yeah, you're right.
Cool. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below this video, send us an email, or you can reach out to us via our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll address those questions in a future episode. But that's it for this one, guys. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you all in the next episode.
Thank you.